So I'd like to begin with our first speaker, and let me share with you his background. This is James Quilligan. Has been an analyst and administrator in the field of international development since 1975. He served as policy advisor and writer for many international politicians and leaders, including Pierre Trudeau, Jacques Mitterrand, Edward Heath, Julius Nyerere, Olaf Palme, Willy Brandt, Jimmy Carter, and His Royal Highness Prince El-Hassan of Jordan. He was a policy advisor and press secretary for the Brandt Commission from 1978 to 1984. He's been an economic consultant for government agencies in Mexico, Argentina, Ecuador, Brazil, Bolivia, Great Britain and the Netherlands, Belgium, France, Portugal, Germany, Austria, Norway, Denmark, Sweden, Ivory Coast, Algeria, Tanzania, Kuwait, India, Thailand, Indonesia, South Korea, Japan, Australia, Canada, and the United States. In addition, he served as an advisor for many United Nations programs and international organizations, including the International Monetary Fund. He's presently Managing Director of Economic Democracy Associates Foundation. So welcome to James.
I really appreciated you defining economic democracy.
Oh, we need the microphone. Sorry.
Slide.
There it is.
Great. It was good to hear this definition of economic democracy, and it reminds me of how much that's actually changing now as a result of new phenomena in the world. Certainly, we're committed to resource justice, equity, and the meaning of economic democracy hasn't changed from that. But something new is happening, and it's a confluence of a number of forces. Climate change, hotter temperatures in the world, of course, as we're experiencing. Rising population and widespread resource declines created by the finite limits of the planet, as well as the rising population, because there's more demand on it for those resources, particularly the non-renewable resources. So our strategy now is to maintain sustainability through renewable resources. That can be done. It's doable with wise management. Non-renewable resources, that's a lot trickier. And therein lies the catalyst for the new definition of economic democracy. Because we not only have to ensure equality now, we have to ensure sustainability. Sustainability is just as important at this point as equality. Because without sustainability, there's no possibility of having equality in the future. Because we're going to have conflicts for resources for centuries to come based on the present trends. So things are changing and our scope has to broaden. And economic democracy now is taking on an entirely new meaning in the world, which is refreshing because it means that, at least in this sense, that the coalitions for economic justice really do need to align with the coalitions for environmental restoration and opposition to climate change and to the mitigation of global warming in general. So it's a broad consensus that has to be built, but I do think it has to be based on not only climate justice, but on economic justice. That's very clear. And I think the two things are essentially the same, because when you think about it, politicians by themselves at the international level can set quotas on emissions, and they can do a lot of work at that level. But in general, we also need to recognize that there is work to be done at the local and regional levels, which is vital, and actually, in many ways, more important than what's being done at the international level. Because, first of all, if we defer our decision-making capacity to people at the global level, not much is going to get done, or at least it's going to get done slowly. And we're all aware of that. But if people do organize at local levels, there's a lot that can be done. And it's not just about traditional advocacy for economic justice. Now it has to do with actually beginning to redefine the meaning of microeconomics, macroeconomics, and the complete idea of supply and demand in the first place. So I would maintain to you that supply and demand is entirely broken. There's no sense of achieving a balance between supply and demand. There never has been, and there never will be. Supply and demand has always been proxy for other factors. So in an age when we thought that infinite economic growth was possible, supply and demand did make some sense, because it meant that the supply represented, generally speaking, the goods and services that were available in the marketplace for people. Very, very simply put. But what supply ignored was the ecological value of those resources, the waste that they generated, the labor processes that were behind them, and a whole other series of factors. They ignored the planetary supply, has ignored the planetary limits. And in an age of when we thought infinite economic growth was possible, we didn't address that problem. Now, at this point, where we stand is that on the demand side, demand is also a proxy for need. And demand does not measure need. Demand measures how much money a person is willing to pay for something and actually pays for it. Demand is a measure of the actual payment of something in process. It doesn't measure human need, only if it's coincidental to the demand. And for people who don't have enough money to fulfill their needs, then their demand doesn't reflect what their needs are. And that goes for broadly speaking, everyone in the world. This is not a problem unique to poor or rich nations. So if supply and demand are broken, and they're just proxies for something, that basically means that we have to create a new accounting system. And it's not a matter of replacing GDP with something else, and it's not a matter of doing the traditional reforms of the capitalist system as we know it. It's a matter of building sustainability into our basic definition of economic democracy. And we have to do that now, and it has to be aligned with equality. And so the goal now, it seems to me, is to find a new basis for an accounting system. And it's not going to be based on what we understood during the 20th century of focusing on corporations as a basic economic unit, or something else in the capitalist world as a basic economic unit. We're going to have to really focus on the basic economic unit as our ecosystems, because ultimately society has to become an ecosystem if we are going to survive. So that's a big premise. And a lot of organizations are now really dedicated to making that happen. We've created 3 years ago at a conference at Prama Institute in Asheville, North Carolina, we created Economic Democracy Advocates for this purpose. So what we're focusing on is, what if the basic economic unit was the bioregion? In particular, we're defining bioregion as, it can be defined many ways, but we're looking at regional watersheds. What if we looked at it that way and began to roll back our political districts so that they were managed more in terms of not the political boundaries, but the political boundaries become more like the natural boundaries? If we can achieve that kind of measure, then we really have something. We can set this up now as a construct by measuring sustainability of our bioregions, meaning now, instead of supply and demand, now we're talking about how the resources that are available within a bioregion meet the needs of the population within that bioregion. So supply is not now what's available on the marketplace. It's about what resources are available in nature that can actually meet the needs of the people in that population, in that the people in that area, not in terms of their demand, but in terms of their actual need. So this is a real revolutionary way of moving to the next level, getting beyond supply and demand, and moving into a new kind of ecological accounting system, social and ecological accounting system that we've neglected in the past. It's my view that we're not going to survive as a human civilization unless we take steps in that direction. So economic democracy advocates, the organization I represent, has a couple of purposes. One is we train people in this background, this context that I just described, and we also keep our eyes on legislation that is moving in that direction. And we create advocacy groups in areas that can support that legislation. I just returned from a conference in Oakland where we trained people over last weekend to advocate for Assembly Bill 933 in California, which protects watersheds throughout the state of California. And we had meetings on Monday with elected officials in that regard. So our view is that political mobilization and advocacy for sustainability is absolutely vital to moving civilization forward. My time is up. I thank you very much.